Hello and welcome to another episode of Pastor's Library. This is the channel where we talk everything about theology books that might be on a reading list for your course at seminary, Bible college or university, a course on theology or biblical studies, or it might just be a book you've seen on a bookshelf in a shop or on your pastor or vicar's office. You know, these are all books that are worthwhile. I hope today that we'll introduce you to something that might perk your interest. I'm all about reading good theology, and I hope that you will like this. If you do like it, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Please also remember to subscribe and to click on the bell. Subscribing costs you nothing, and all it will do is will help us get out these messages further afield. And if you click on the bell, all it does is let you know when we launch another episode. So I hope this will be satisfactory for you today. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments section below the screen. Okay, today we're going to talk about a fairly new commentary series. To the best of my knowledge, there are only 3 volumes out so far. The first one was Mark in 2017, and this commentary series is called Through Old Testament Eyes. Now, that tells you 2 things. Firstly, this is a New Testament commentary series, and secondly, it is broadly referring back to the Old Testament, building links so that we can see where the New Testament authors were trying to get us to think about the Old Testament, or where indeed they were just trying to build stronger ties for us. So the first one is written by Andrew Lepeau, who is the series editor. Like I say, this came out in 2017. Andrew Lepeau, I hadn't read anything else by him. I have to say, this is very good. And of course, being the prime example of the new series, he has the opportunity to really lay out exactly his vision for it. And I think he's done a really good job. Basically, the book has a running commentary on the verses, like you would expect. And then it has some in deeper sections where it looks at particular themes that the author is getting us to examine. It also has sections where it looks back on the connections with the Old Testament. And I think this is quite refreshing. This is a little bit different. I think it's really good. These books are also all in paperback, and they're not terribly expensive. In the UK, you're typically paying £25 for a volume. Sometimes you get it a little bit cheaper, but this is value for money, I would suggest. Now, to give you sort of an idea of items covered, Lepeau draws our attention in some of his Old Testament eyes sections between the comparisons between Mark chapter 6 and Psalm 23. And he puts in a table, which is very clear, very lucid, easy to process. And he shows how the structure of Mark 6 echoes the structure of Psalm 23. And though there is so much similarity between the words used. He also, in a section on going deeper into discipleship, he talks about taking up your cross daily. He talks about the suffering that must be endured potentially by all believers, and he talks about how it is helpful to us all to consider what following Christ might cost us, and then walk out confidently knowing that we're prepared to face that. And I think that's something which is probably not talked about enough. In Mark chapter 9, he gives us another one of these comparison tables, talking about Moses on Sinai compared with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. And here, the echoes are so strong, it's like you could get the 2 stories mixed up, really. The emphasis here has surely got to be that Mark is saying this is another Sinai experience, which of course for Jewish Christians was an enormous echo in their minds anyway. Sinai was something that was very much in the Jewish mindset. So that's just a little bit about this first edition, and I would say to you, I find it very helpful indeed. The second one to come out, I think this is in 2021, was John's Gospel. Now this is by Karen Jobes. Now if you haven't come across Karen Jobes before, she's on the NIV Translation Committee. I think her initial role was to work on Esther. Now she's sort of been rolled out into the more general group. And dare I say this to you, but she was the first woman involved in NIV translation. Isn't that frightening that we've only got one woman? I've noticed in other books I've read by Karen Jobes that she is very gifted and talented with her language, and apparently that goes back to her Old Testament languages as well. So I think Karen Jobes is somebody who is very trustworthy and very well worth engaging in. And she follows Lepeau's example from Mark when working on John's Gospel, and she does a very good job. So she'll start in the beginning of John's Gospel talking about the echoes of Genesis chapter 1, and she will go into that at some depth. And when she goes into a subset of through Old Testament eyes, she will talk more in depth about this, looks at the themes of creation, the tabernacle, God's dwelling with people, and this type of thing. When we get to John chapter 2, she makes two major points. That the miracle of changing water into wine announced the dawning of a new messianic age. I think this is a very interesting one to dwell on, and there's a wonderful couple of pages dealing with this, and I would suggest to you her thought process is engaging and again a little bit different, and I find it refreshing. I really do. The other matter that I said of the two items is that Jesus takes over the function of the temple and brings us together as a new temple. And I really think her ideas in this are refreshing, helpful. I think you find them good. In the section on John chapter 3, we'll see a lot of discussion about Nicodemus and about the Old Testament background of ideas like second birth. This is something which, again, if you engage with the text, you will find a lot of understanding maybe of things like Isaiah chapter 52. I think whereas John chapter 3 doesn't have many explicit uses of the Old Testament, what she does is pull together how it is alluding to Old Testament ideas. When we go over into John chapter 4, and this is as far as I'm going to go, there's a really interesting section on promiscuity and the gospel. You know, one might say, where's this come from? Well, it does come from the Samaritan woman, but Jobes is very, very interesting on how she fits this in, and very orthodox, conservative, and biblical in her application of the scriptures. So that's the second volume by Karen Jobes. Then this one came out in 2022, and I leapt at this because this is a commentary on the book of Revelation by the great Old Testament scholar Tremper Longman III. And you say to yourself, hang on a minute, he does Old Testament. I mean, he's general editor for some series. He's a great overarching voice in Old Testament theology. And he's dealing here with something which is quite different. Well, what I would say about this book is it's very orthodox. It's very good. He hasn't shocked me in any areas. He's got a very good handle on Revelation. I suppose the thing that I'm slightly questioning about his handling of this is also probably a very positive thing, in that he isn't definitive about the genre of the book. Now, personally, I see Revelation as an apocalypse. But he says, but it is also letters, it's also prophecy, because it says it's prophecy. So you have to hand this to him. He's very even-handed in his interpretation. And a lot of the other matters are very given over to an apocalyptic reading. He mentions, for example, just how much of Daniel is quoted. Daniel is prophesying about end times, and of course Revelation has got something to do with end times, if not just the end times of the believers in that generation, but maybe the total rolling up of time. So that's helpful. He has a great section on Psalms and their connection with the book of Revelation. That's about 3.5 pages, and it's very, very helpful. And that is probably not the section I expected the most. I would have expected more maybe on Daniel, on Ezekiel, on Exodus, certainly. But he really hammers home the Psalms. And I think, again, that's quite refreshing. He does go on, though, to a very great connection with Ezekiel, which is about almost 5 pages. So there's a lot of depth there. I suppose if I had to be slightly critical of this, it would be that I don't think he spends enough time doing the title right. He doesn't spend enough time going through the Old Testament eyes. He talks much more about the running commentary through the verses and looking into going deeper. I would prefer if he'd spend a little bit more time on, for example, connections with the book of Exodus. It's not that he ignores it, it's just I don't think there's maybe quite maybe a slight missed opportunity here, I suppose. And that's as much as I would say. Is this a good commentary on Revelation? It's written by Tremper Longman, of course it is. This is an excellent book. I'm just saying I maybe would have liked to have seen a little bit more connections with the title in this one, which doesn't have as many sections on the Through Old Testament Eyes as Mark or John. This is the first 3. I understand that Matthew is on the way. I understand that Ephesians is on the way. So there are more coming. You'll know exactly how many volumes there are going to be because you know how many books there are in the New Testament. But what I would say is this is definitely one to watch. Books, like I've said, not too expensive. This is something you can build up slowly, particularly at this rate of release. You know, we've had, 4 years and we've had 3 volumes come out. That is not a lot. If you have to buy one a year, that's going to not set you back a terrible amount of money, and yet your bookshelf will slowly fill up. It will give you a great resource for your library. So I would have to say I'm a bit of a fan of these. I think they're very good. And I think that the Mark by LePau, being the general editor, being the guy who set the idea up in the first place, I think that's probably the first one to go for. Karen Jobes, absolutely excellent. And if you want to see Tremper Longman doing a book which you would very rarely have expected him to deal with, then this is your opportunity. This is a great series of commentaries, one that I can thoroughly endorse and recommend, and I hope you'll get something from them. If you've got any comments or questions, please stick them in the comments section below. And until next time, I'll say goodbye and God bless you. Bye!